A broke farmer spent his last 2 coins on a giant orc nobody wanted. But the moment he saw the bracelet on her wrist, he realized this orc had been carrying his family's secret for 15 years. The morning Rowan spent his last 2 gold coins on a creature he did not need, he told himself it was a practical decision. He was wrong. It was the beginning of everything. Iron Hollow smelled of old mud and bad decisions. The market rose from the valley floor like a wound that had never properly healed. Wooden stalls crammed with stolen goods, pinned animals too thin to be worth their feed, and at the far eastern end, behind iron posts and rusted chain, the slave cages. Rowan kept his eyes forward as he walked the main road. He had come for a mule. Just a mule. Something sturdy enough to help him work the eastern field before the first frost turned the soil to iron. He found 3 mules, inspected their legs, checked their teeth, and discovered their price was 4 gold coins each. He had 2. The merchant, a round man with a smile that never reached his eyes, shrugged and turned away. The market offered no sympathy and no credit. Rowan stood in the middle of the crowd, feeling the particular humiliation of a man who had walked an entire day for nothing. Around him, buyers haggled over copper pots, caged birds, and sacks of questionable grain. He was turning to leave when he heard the auctioneer. Final call. The green one. Last chance before the rendering house gets her. He should have kept walking. He did not. The cage at the end of the eastern row was barely large enough for the creature inside it. She was an orc, tall even when crouching, with dark greenish-gray skin pulled tight over wide shoulders. Her wrists were bound in rusted shackles connected by a short chain. Her clothes were little more than layers of torn cloth, and her dark hair was matted and dull. She looked like someone had tried very hard to break her and had simply grown tired of the effort. What stopped Rowan was not her size or her silence. It was that she was the only one in the cage row not performing. The other captives rattled their bars, wept loudly, or threw curses at the crowd. She sat with her back against the rusted iron, eyes low, expression completely still, not resigned, not defeated, more like a person sitting through a storm they had already decided they would outlast. The auctioneer, a thin man with a voice far too large for his body, threw his arms wide at the small crowd. Healthy female, working age, strong as an ox, twice as stubborn. 2 years she's been passed from house to house. Won't cook, won't clean, refuses every order she doesn't choose to follow. A problem, yes, but the right man could. Useless, someone called out. Dangerous, said another. The auctioneer dropped his voice. Starting bid, 1 silver. 1 silver, gentlemen. Anyone. Nobody moved. The orc did not look up. She did not seem to care whether anyone bid or not. That stillness, that complete refusal to beg, landed somewhere uncomfortable in Rowan's chest. He found himself pushing forward before he had finished thinking. 2 gold, he said. The crowd turned. The auctioneer blinked. 2 gold. Sir, she's been returned twice. She's not. 2 gold, Rowan said again, flatly, the way a man speaks when he has already done the arguing inside his own head. No counterbids came. Only silence, and a few whispers that sounded like the word fool. He paid. The cage was unlocked. Rowan was handed a short chain attached to her wrist shackle, a humiliation he did not enjoy holding, and they stood together for the first time. She was nearly a full head taller than him. She looked at him the way a person looks at a road they have not decided yet whether to travel. I'm not going to pull that chain, Rowan said quietly. You walk where I walk or you don't. Your choice. She said nothing, but she walked. They moved through the market in silence. Rowan kept his eyes ahead, already doing the miserable arithmetic of the journey home. 2 days on foot, no mule, winter still coming regardless. He was so deep in his own thoughts that he almost missed it when she paused at the water trough near the market's edge. Not asking, simply stopping. Drink if you need to, he said. She drank, and when she straightened, the soaked sleeve of her left arm pulled back from her wrist, and Rowan saw it. A bracelet, silver, thin, with a pattern of small leaves bent into the metal. Simple work, the kind a village silversmith makes. The kind that costs 1 week's harvest and gets worn every day for years. The kind Rowan had given his wife on the morning of their first harvest together. The kind that had been on Elend's wrist the night she disappeared. He stopped breathing. His hand moved before he could stop it. He caught her wrist, gently, but firmly, and turned it just enough to see the inside of the bracelet where, 15 years ago, he had scratched 3 letters with a cobbler's awl. R.E.M. Rowan. Elin. Mira. The letters were still there. He looked up. For the first time, the orc was not still. Her jaw had tightened. Her eyes, dark brown, almost black, were moving rapidly between his face and her own wrist. She was afraid. Not the performance of fear. Real fear, the kind that lives deep in the body and surfaces without permission. Where? Rowan said, his voice barely a whisper. Did you get this? She pulled her arm back. Her face closed like a door slamming shut. She said nothing. Rowan stood in the middle of Iron Hollow's busy market, surrounded by strangers, holding an empty chain, and felt the world rearrange itself into something he did not yet have words for. He had come for a mule. He had spent his last 2 coins on a mystery that had been walking the world for 15 years, wearing his dead wife's bracelet. And she was afraid of him, which meant she knew exactly what that bracelet was. She did not answer his question that night, nor the next morning, nor the one after that. Rowan had removed the shackles on the first evening, using an old chisel and a hammer in the light of the hearth fire. He did not ask permission. He simply did it, the way a man removes a stone from a path because it should not be there. She watched his hands the entire time, ready to move. When the last shackle fell to the floor, she pulled her wrists back slowly, rubbed the raw skin beneath, and said nothing. He showed her the small room off the back of the farmhouse. A straw mattress, a wool blanket, a cracked clay bowl for water. Nothing fine, but nothing cruel either. This is yours, he said. Not a cage. You can leave whenever you decide to. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room for a long moment. Then she stepped inside and closed the door behind her. That was all. Rowan sat by the fire that night, turning the bracelet question over and over in his mind like a stone. He kept expecting to find something written underneath. He had carried the grief of Elin's disappearance for 15 years. He had carried the smaller, sharper grief of Mira, an infant when she vanished, gone before she had ever really arrived in the world. He had learned, slowly and badly, to set both griefs down each morning and pick them up again each night. It was the only way the farm got worked. Now something had picked them up for him, and he did not know what to do with his hands. On the second day, he came outside after breakfast to find the eastern fence repaired. 3 posts had been leaning since summer, the rails sagging between them. It was a half-day job he had been postponing. Someone had reset all 3 posts in fresh-packed earth and replaced the broken rail with timber from the woodpile, cut cleanly and fitted without a single wasted stroke. He looked around. She was at the far edge of the yard, splitting logs with the axe he kept behind the barn. Her technique was not elegant. It was simply effective, each swing precise and without wasted motion, the wood splitting on the first blow nearly every time. He did not thank her. He understood somehow that she would not want that. He simply went back inside and put more porridge on the fire, enough for 2. She came in without being called and ate without speaking. But she ate all of it. On the 3rd day, just before dusk, he found her standing at the small shrine at the edge of the south field. He had built it years ago from flat stones and river clay, a simple thing with 2 names carved into the largest stone. Elin. Mira. He placed wildflowers there in summer and dry pine boughs in winter. It was the only ritual he had kept without fail. She had left something on the stone ledge beneath the names. A small bundle of herbs, the kind used in orc burial rites, he realized, which he knew only vaguely from old border stories. Dried gray-green stems tied with a strip of dark thread. A morning offering, the kind left not for the dead, but for the dead who were not given proper farewell. She was standing with her back to him, arms crossed, and he was certain she had heard him approach. He stopped several paces behind her and looked at the herbs and then at the 2 carved names. His voice, when it came, was quieter than he intended. You knew her. Not a question. He was past questions. She did not turn around. Her shoulders rose once and settled. I knew of her, she said. It was the first time he had heard her voice at full volume, not strained through silence. It was lower than he expected, careful, like a woman who had learned to measure every word before releasing it. That is not the same thing, Rowan said. No, she agreed. It is not. He waited. She did not continue. I need to know where you got the bracelet, he said. I have asked you once. I will not keep asking. But I need to know. She turned then. In the dying light, she looked less like a threat and more like a person carrying something very heavy in a place that did not show. You would not like the answer, she said. I have not liked anything that has happened in 15 years, Rowan said. I have survived it all the same. Something moved behind her eyes. Not softness exactly. More like a door opening a fraction. Enough to feel the air from the other side. Not enough to see through. Give me time, she said finally. I will tell you. But not tonight. That night Rowan lay awake listening to the farmhouse settle in the cold and thought about the herbs on the shrine. Thought about the way she had placed them not carelessly, but with the deliberate hands of someone who had done it before. Many times. For a long time. As though she had been mourning Elin and Mira far longer than he had known she existed. They left before sunrise. Rowan had not asked whether she would come. He had simply packed 2 days of bread and dried meat, checked the knife at his belt, and walked to her door. When he knocked, she opened it already dressed, a worn traveling cloak across her shoulders, eyes clear in the way of someone who had not slept but had spent the night doing something useful instead, deciding. She had decided to come. The road to Ashvale was not a road anymore. It had been a road 15 years ago, well-worn between the borderland villages, wide enough for 2 carts side by side. Now the forest had quietly reclaimed it. Trees grew through the old wheel ruts. Bramble crossed where gates had once stood. The land had healed over the village the way skin grows over a scar, smooth on the surface, hard and uneven underneath. They walked mostly in silence. Not the cold silence of the first days at the farm. Something different now. A silence with texture, the kind that exists between 2 people who have both decided, without saying it aloud, that they are no longer enemies. It was Thera who spoke first, somewhere past midday when the trees began to thin and the faint outline of Ashvale's old stone boundary wall appeared through the undergrowth. I have been here before, she said. I know, Rowan said. She looked at him sideways. You were a scout, he said. You told me that much on the first night. In your sleep. Her jaw tightened. She said nothing, but her pace slowed slightly, and he understood that was admission enough. Ashvale was a hollow place. The buildings were stone-framed, which was why anything still stood at all. Timber roofs had long since collapsed inward, leaving the walls standing like rows of open mouths. Weeds split the old cobblestones of the village square. The well at the center had been sealed with rubble, and someone, he did not know when, or who, had placed a rough wooden marker beside it bearing no name. Only a single carved symbol he did not recognize. Thera recognized it. He watched her face when she saw it. Watched something old and heavy move through her expression before she locked it away. Orc death marker, she said quietly. Placed for those who died without witness. Orcs placed a marker here. Rowan asked. Someone did, she said. Long after the raid. He let that sit and moved toward the far end of the village where his own house had stood. The walls remained, waist high, the rest swallowed by 15 years of ivy and moss. He stood at what had been the doorway and felt nothing dramatic. Only the dull ache of a wound pressed on too often to hurt sharply anymore. Then he saw the marks on the stone. Sword cuts. Low on the interior wall, sharp and deliberate, the kind left not in battle but in close, frantic violence in a small space. And beside them, near the floor, the dark stain that even 15 years of weather had not completely erased from porous stone. His jaw worked silently. She fought, Thera said from behind him. Her voice had changed, flatter, more careful, as though she were reading from something written inside herself. Your wife? She did not run. She put the child behind her, and she fought. Rowan turned slowly. You were here. I was outside the wall, Thera said. Young. 17. A scout, as you said. My orders were to mark positions. Nothing more, she paused. What I saw inside the village was not what I had been told the raid would be. What had you been told? A border skirmish. A warning raid. Drive the settlers back. Take some livestock. Burn the outer buildings. Her eyes moved across the ruined walls. What happened here was not a warning. It was a removal. Every person, every building, everything that proved this village had existed. Orcs, Rowan began. Orcs lit some of the fires, Thera said. Yes, I will not deny that. But the ones who gave orders that night were not orc commanders. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Rowan had heard in years. Show me, he said. She led him to the eastern edge of the village. where the old granary had stood. The foundation stones were still clear. She paced along the outer wall and stopped at the corner where two stones had been wedged apart by a tree root growing through years of neglect. She worked the root aside with her hands and pulled from the gap behind it a flat piece of treated leather, folded many times and blackened with age, wrapped in what had once been waxed cloth. She held it out to him. Inside the leather was a single sheet of parchment. Old ink, faded but legible. A list of names. Amounts of coin beside each name. At the top, a seal he recognized, not an Orc clan marking. A noble house sigil. Human. A lord whose name he knew from border tax records. His hands were not steady when he looked up. This was planned, he said. By a lord. A human lord. Yes, Thra said. And Ashvale was not the only village. Day 10, Forest Shrine of the Moon Spirits. They did not speak about the parchment on the road back. There was too much in it. Too many names, too much coin. Too deliberate a plan written in the hand of a man who had sat at a desk and signed the death of an entire village the way another man might sign a grain order. Rowan folded the leather carefully and placed it inside his coat, against his chest, where he could feel it with every breath. A reminder that the world had been arranged against people like him long before he understood the rules of the arrangement. That night, they camped at the edge of the forest, a small fire between them, the darkness pressing close on all sides. Thra sat with her knees drawn up, eyes on the flame. Rowan sat across from her and waited. He was good at waiting. 15 years of unanswered grief had made him patient in a way no peaceful life ever could. It was the fire that loosened her, he thought. The way it does with people who have spent too long carrying something alone. The warmth reaches past the careful outer layers and finds the tired place underneath. She began without preamble, the way people begin when they have rehearsed something so many times that the introduction has worn away completely. After the raid, she said, I went back into the village. Why? Rowan asked. You said your orders were to observe and leave. I heard the child, she said simply. She had gone back through the smoke and the ruin, through the sounds that she did not describe and he did not ask her to. She had followed the crying to the house at the eastern edge, his house, where Elin lay against the interior wall, badly wounded, the infant wrapped in her own cloak and pressed into the corner behind her. Elin had looked up at her, a young Orc scout, enemy by every measure of the world they lived in, standing in the doorway of her burning village. And she had not screamed or begged or cursed. She had simply looked at Thra with the particular clarity of a woman who knows exactly how much time she has left and has already decided how to spend it. Take her, Elin had said, in the common tongue, slow and clear. Please, take her and keep her alive. Thra had hesitated. Every instinct of her training, her clan, her world had told her to walk away. To leave the human child to the human disaster that human commanders had designed. She took off the bracelet, Thra said. Her voice had dropped. Rowan realized he had stopped breathing again. She put it in my hand, and she closed my fingers around it. She said. Thra stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. She said, so she knows where she came from. So someone remembers us. The fire crackled between them. Somewhere in the dark above the trees an owl called once and went silent. I took the child, Thra said. I carried her out through the eastern field, away from the raiders, away from everything. She cried for 2 days without stopping. I had no milk, no cloth, nothing a child needs. I traded my sword, the only thing of value I owned, for a goat at the first farmstead I found that had not heard about the raid yet. Rowan's throat was tight. He said nothing. I searched for you, Thra said, and now she looked directly at him across the fire, and he understood this part cost her something. For 4 months I asked at every village, every crossroads, every market on the border. Rowan of Ashvale, a farmer, mid-30s, dark hair, a scar on his left hand from a plow accident. She paused. You have that scar. He looked down at his left hand without meaning to. The old white line across the palm. I heard you were dead, she said. 2 separate people told me. A trader and a border guard. They said a farmer from Ashvale had been found in the eastern wood, killed in the raid. I believed them. The words arrived slowly, the way very heavy things fall, not fast, but with a weight that cannot be stopped once it begins. She had searched for him. She had carried his daughter across 4 months of dangerous borderland roads, half-starved, alone, a young orc female with a human infant, in a world that would have condemned both of them on sight. She had searched, and then she had been lied to by strangers who did not know they were redirecting an entire life. "You raised her," Rowan said. His voice came out strange. Not angry, not grateful, something that had no clean name. "I raised her," Thra said. "I had no right to. I had no choice either." "What is she like?" The question escaped him before he could decide whether to ask it. For the first time since Iron Hollow, something crossed Thra's face that was not guarded. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. "Stubborn," she said. "Brave past the point of sense. She asks questions that have no comfortable answers and refuses the comfortable ones when you offer them." Rowan exhaled slowly. "She sounds like her mother," he said. "Yes," Thra said quietly. "She does." Stonehaven was the kind of city that had grown faster than anyone had planned for. Streets bent around each other without logic. Buildings leaned together at the upper floors as though holding each other upright, and the noise of 10,000 people living in the space meant for 5,000 rows from it like heat from a forge. Rowan had been here twice in his life, both times for market, both times glad to leave. He followed Thra through it now with the focused silence of a man who understood that one wrong step in the next few hours could cost him everything he had only just learned he still had. She led him to the textile district, where the streets narrowed and the smell of dye vats replaced the smell of livestock. She stopped outside a low building with a worn wooden sign. A needle and thread burned into the timber, the mark of a seamstress or tailor. She did not go in immediately. She stood with her hand flat against the doorframe and stared at the grain of the wood for a long moment. "Whatever she says to you," Thra said quietly, "do not raise your voice." "I am not in the habit of shouting at children," Rowan said. "She is not a child," Thra said. "That is the problem." She knocked twice, paused, knocked once more. A specific rhythm. The door opened. Mira was 17 and she filled a doorway the way her mother never had, broad-shouldered, taller than most girls her age, with the greenish undertone to her skin that spoke clearly of orc blood in her line, though her features were otherwise her mother's almost entirely. Elan's jaw, Elan's eyes, dark and direct. Elan's way of looking at a stranger as though she were already 3 steps into deciding what they were. She looked at Thra first, and her face opened completely. Relief, warmth, a flash of something younger than 17. Then she looked at Rowan, and it closed again just as fast. "Who is he?" she asked. Directed at Thra. "Not at him." "Someone I need you to speak with," Thra said. "That is not an answer." "No," Thra agreed. "It is not. Let us in, Mira." They sat in the small workroom behind the shop front. Bolts of cloth were stacked against the walls, and a half-finished garment hung from a wooden frame in the corner. Mira sat across from Rowan with her arms folded and her eyes steady, and he understood immediately what Thra had meant. She was not a child. She was a young woman who had grown up navigating a world that did not have a simple category for her, and she had developed the particular toughness that such a life produces. Rowan had rehearsed this. He had rehearsed it for 3 days on the road. Every version had seemed reasonable in the dark of the forest camp, and every version died the moment he sat across from his daughter and found he could not find the beginning of any of them. He reached into his coat and placed the silver bracelet on the table between them. He had asked Thra for it the previous night. She had removed it without a word and given it to him. Mira looked at the bracelet. Something flickered behind her eyes. "I know that," she said carefully. "Your mother gave it to the woman who raised you," Rowan said. "The night Ashvale was raided. The night you were taken from it." "I know the story of that night," Mira said. Her voice was controlled, tight at the edges. "Then you know there was a father," Rowan said. The room went very quiet. "Thra told me my father died in the raid," Mira said. She did not look at Thra when she said it. "Thra was told I died," Rowan said. "By people who were wrong. I have been on that farm outside Millhaven for 15 years. Alone." Myra's eyes moved to Thra then. A long look. Something passed between them, old and complicated, the language of 2 people who have lived together long enough to argue without words. "You said he was dead," Mira said. Quiet. Dangerous the way very quiet things can be. "I believed it," Thra said. "I would not lie to you about that. You lied about other things." "I kept other things," Thra said carefully. "That is not the same." Mira stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the narrow street below, her back to both of them. Rowan watched her and saw Elin in every line of her and could not speak. "If you are my father," Mira said to the window, "where have you been for 17 years? Looking," Rowan said, "and then surviving, and then looking again. That is not good enough." "No," he said, "it is not." She turned then. Her eyes were bright, but her jaw was set, and he understood she was not going to cry in front of him. Not today. Maybe not ever, if he did not earn it. "I don't know you," she said. "Thera raised me. Thera fed me and fought for me and carried me across half the world when I was too small to know it. You are a name and a bracelet and a story that arrived 17 years too late." Every word landed exactly where she intended it to. "I know," Rowan said. "I am not here to replace anything. I am here because you are alive. And because she kept you alive," he glanced at Thera. "That is enough for today." Mira looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat back down. She did not smile. She did not soften. But she sat down. And that was something. The trouble found them on the third morning out of Stonehaven. Rowan had known it was coming. Not the specific shape of it. Not the four riders appearing from the tree line at the road's bend. Not the particular gray of their cloaks or the bounty hunter marks burned into their saddle leather. But the general shape. The shape of consequence. The parchment inside his coat had names on it. Names meant power. Power meant people who would move quickly and quietly to ensure that parchment never reached anyone who could read it aloud in the right room. He had simply hoped for more time. Mira had chosen to travel with them. Not warmly. She spoke little and kept her distance from Rowan on the road the way a person keeps distance from a fire they are not certain is safe. But she had packed her things the morning after their meeting in the workroom and appeared at Thera's side without explanation, and nobody had questioned it. Some decisions announced themselves only through action. The riders came at a trot, unhurried, which was worse than a charge. Unhurried meant confident. It meant they had counted 3 people on foot and found the arithmetic comfortable. "Keep walking," Thera said quietly. "They are blocking the road," Mira said. "Keep walking," Thera said again. They kept walking. The riders fanned across the road and stopped. The lead man was heavy-set with a short beard and the flat professional eyes of someone who did not particularly enjoy his work, but had done it long enough that enjoyment was no longer relevant. "The orc," he said. "Not her name. Not even a full sentence. Just the category, the way you point at a market item." "There are 3 of us," Rowan said. "And you have said nothing to me yet. That is an error." The man looked at him with mild curiosity. "You are a farmer." "I am a farmer holding a document that names your employer as the architect of the Ashvale massacre," Rowan said. "If you take us, that document reaches the city council within 2 days regardless. I have made arrangements." He had made no arrangements. He had nothing except the parchment and the lie, and he held both with equal steadiness. The lead rider studied him, then looked at Thera, then back at Rowan. The mathematics of the situation were shifting, and the man was clearly not accustomed to arithmetic that moved. It was Mira who broke the stillness. She had drifted 2 steps to the left without anyone noticing, and now she was beside the nearest horse, one hand on the rider's boot, looking up at him with an expression that was almost pleasant. "Your saddle strap is loose," she said conversationally, and then she yanked it free with both hands. The horse lurched. The rider grabbed for his reins. The other horses shied sideways. In the space that chaos opened, Thera moved. And when Thera moved with intention, she was something the open road had not been prepared for. She pulled the lead rider from his saddle by his cloak collar with one arm, set him on the ground hard enough to take the air from him, and held him there with one knee and a grip that left no philosophical room for debate. "Listen," she said to the man beneath her, calm as still water. "I have been hunted before. I have been caught before. I have been sold, caged, and returned like spoiled goods at a market stall. I am still here." She leaned close. "Tell your employer the document exists. Tell him it has already been copied. Tell him that the farmer and the girl know every name on it. And tell him that I have been patient for 15 years, and I have now run completely out of patience." She stood. The man scrambled upright, remounted with the dignity of someone trying to pretend a thing had not happened, and the 4 riders left the road at a speed considerably less professional than their arrival. The 3 of them stood in the sudden quiet of the empty road. Mira looked at Thera, then at Rowan, then back at the retreating riders. "You have no arrangements," she said to Rowan. Flat. Certain. None, he agreed. So that was a lie. It was a calculation, he said. There is a difference. She considered this with the focused expression of someone filing information away in a place they will return to later. Then she looked at Thera, at the controlled steadiness of her, the complete absence of panic, and something shifted behind Myra's eyes. Small, barely visible. The particular shift that happens when a person sees someone they thought they knew completely and discovers a new angle they had not accounted for. Not surprised that Thera had acted. She had always known Thera was capable of that. Something else. Something about the way Thera had placed herself in front of both of them, without choosing, without hesitating, without calculation. They walked in silence for a while after that. The road curved north into the tree shadow, and the cold deepened around them. It was the first time Mira walked close enough to Rowan that their footsteps matched rhythm on the road. She did not acknowledge it. Neither did he. But neither of them stepped away. Blackrock Keep had not been a seat of power for 2 generations. That was the story, anyway. The official version, the one written in city ledgers and repeated by merchants who traveled the northern roads, that the keep had been abandoned after the old lord's line died out, left to weather and moss and the occasional desperate traveler seeking shelter from a hard winter. The truth, Rowan was beginning to understand, was that powerful men rarely abandoned anything. They simply moved their workings underground and changed the sign above the door. They approached from the eastern ridge, staying off the main path. Thera had known about the keep for years. She had said this plainly the night before, sitting by the fire in a woodcutter's abandoned shelter, spreading out from memory a rough map scratched into the dirt with a stick. She had circled the keep without drama and said, "Everything that was planned is recorded here. Not in the main hall. Below it." "You have been inside," Rowan said. "Once," she said. 3 years ago. I found the lower chambers, but not the records room. I was discovered before I reached it, and I ran a pause. I am not ashamed of running. I was alone." "You are not alone now," Mira said. She had said it simply, without ceremony, the way she said most things. But Rowan had watched Thera receive it, the slight shift in her posture, the breath drawn a fraction deeper, and understood it had cost Mira something to say it. And that Thera knew that too. The keep was half ruin and half pretense. The outer walls had been allowed to crumble convincingly. The inner structure, however, was maintained with the quiet diligence of a place still in active use. Fresh mortar between certain stones. A door with a new hinge disguised under a layer of painted rust. Rowan noticed these things because 15 years of farming had made him attentive to the difference between something genuinely abandoned and something pretending to be. They entered through a drainage channel at the keep's northern base, a narrow crawl through black water and older darkness that Mira navigated without complaint and Rowan navigated with considerable complaint. He kept entirely internal. The lower chambers were cold in the way that deep stone is cold, not the cold of weather but the cold of the earth itself, indifferent and constant. Thera led them through 2 corridors by memory, pausing once at a junction to close her eyes and stand completely still for a moment before choosing left. The records room was behind a door that looked like a wall. Fitted stone, no handle, no frame, but Thera pressed 3 specific points in sequence, and the stone swung inward on a weighted pivot with the soft precision of something built by a craftsman who understood that concealment was its own form of craftsmanship. Inside were shelves, floor to ceiling, both walls, filled with bound ledgers and rolled documents sealed with wax. The seals were all the same. The noble house sigil from the parchment at Ashvale. Lord Aldrich Vaughan, a name Rowan had carried like a coal in his chest since the moment he had read it in the ruins. They worked by the light of a single hooded lantern, moving carefully through the ledgers. Mira read fastest, her eyes scanning and moving with the efficiency of someone who had learned her letters in a city where reading was practical currency. She pulled volumes and passed them to Rowan, who cross-referenced dates against what he remembered of the borderland raids from that period. What they assembled, piece by piece in the cold silence of the hidden room, was not just the story of Ashvale. It was the story of 7 villages, 7 settlements along the border, each erased over a span of 4 years. Each recorded here in careful columns. Payments to mercenary commanders, payments to Orc clan leaders who had been bribed to provide visible raiders, payments to officials who had filed reports blaming border orc tribes for all of it. The entire architecture of a lie, built to cover the seizure of borderland territories whose mineral rights were then quietly transferred to Vorn's estate holdings. Ashvale had not been a tragedy. It had been a transaction. Rowan sat back on his heels and looked at the open ledger in his hands and felt something move through him that was beyond anger. Anger had heat. This was cold, clear and permanent, like water finding the shape of a vessel. He blamed the orcs, Mira said. She was holding a document, a formal report filed with the city council 15 years ago, signed by Vorn, attributing all 7 raids to orc aggression and calling for punitive border policies that had been enacted and that had poisoned human and orc relations for a generation. Yes, Thra said. She was standing at the far shelf, very still. And we believed it too. Some of my people. They accepted the gold and told themselves it was a border war. By the time they understood what they had been used for, the story was already written. Mira looked at her. You have known all of this. I have known pieces, Thra said. This room has the rest, she turned. This is why I could not tell you everything sooner. This is why I kept Myra's existence quiet, kept moving, kept silent. Vorn has had people watching for anyone who might have survived with knowledge of what happened. Mira being alive, a witness, even unknowingly, was a danger I could not explain to a child. I am not a child, Mira said. No, Thra said. You are not. I should have told you sooner. That is a debt I owe you. The silence that followed was different from all the silences before it. Older, more settled. The kind that follows when the last locked door in a long corridor finally opens and you can see the full length of everything behind you. Rowan began carefully removing documents from the shelves. The ones that mattered. The ones with dates, amounts, signatures, seals. Evidence that had survived 15 years in the cold dark because the man who created it had been too proud of his own careful work to destroy it. That pride was about to cost him everything. The snow came early that year. It arrived not as a warning, but as a fact, overnight, without ceremony, turning the mountain road to Frost Pass into a white silence that muffled sound and erased landmarks and made the world feel smaller than it was. Rowan walked with the documents wrapped in oilcloth inside his coat, pressed against the parchment from Ashvale, the 2 pieces of evidence sitting together against his chest like a second heartbeat. They had been 3 days from the city when the riders appeared behind them on the pass road. Not 4 this time. 12. Vorn's personal guard, in full colors, which meant Vorn had stopped pretending. A man stops pretending when he has decided that speed matters more than appearances. That decision meant he was afraid. Good, Rowan thought. He should be. How far to the pass summit? Rowan asked. An hour, Thra said, not looking back. Maybe less. And the southern descent. Open road. Council territory. His guard cannot operate openly there without answering for it. Then we reach the summit, Rowan said. They are 12, Mira said. Yes, Rowan agreed. We are 3. I am aware of that. She looked at him sideways with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and something that might, under different circumstances and with more time, become something warmer. You sound like her, she said. Like who? Thra, she said. When she has already decided and does not want to discuss it. Thra said nothing, but Rowan caught the edge of something cross her face. Not quite a smile. The shadow of one. The same shadow he had seen in Stonehaven when she described Myra's stubbornness. He filed it away and kept walking. The riders closed the distance at the pass narrows, where the road squeezed between 2 rock faces and the footing turned uncertain with ice beneath the fresh snow. It was a bad place to be caught and a worse place to fight, which meant it was exactly where Vorn's commander had intended to catch them. The first arrow came from above, a scout on the rock ledge Rowan had not seen. It took Thra across the left side, below the shoulder, and she made no sound. She broke the shaft without slowing and turned to face the narrows with the expression of a woman who had been waiting a long time for this particular moment and intended to be present for all of it. Thra, Mira started. After, Thra said, one word. Absolute. What followed in the narrows was not glorious. It was cold and close and desperate, the way real fights are. Nothing like the clean violence of stories. Rowan used the rock face and the narrow ground the way a farmer uses terrain, practically, without pride. He was not a soldier. He was a man who had plowed difficult land for 40 years and understood that the ground itself is always an advantage to whoever reads it better. Mira fought with a ferocity that stopped two of Vorn's guard cold simply because they had not expected it. She had grown up on city streets that did not forgive naivety, raised by a woman who had understood that the world required daughters to be capable of their own survival. She was capable, more than capable. She moved through the Narrows like water, finding every available gap, quick and purposeful, with none of the hesitation that slows people who have not yet decided how far they are willing to go. Thra held the center, wounded, bleeding steadily through the broken shaft still lodged in her side. She held the center of the Narrows with the absolute physical authority of someone who has made a decision about what they are willing to spend. She was not fighting to win. She was fighting to ensure the other two had time to. There is a particular kind of courage in that, not the hot courage of anger or the cold courage of duty, but the quiet courage of a person who has looked at two people they love and decided their own safety is simply the least important variable in the calculation. It was in the middle of this, the noise, the cold, the desperate press of bodies in the narrow pass, that Mira shouted it. Not planned, not considered. The way true things surface when the careful layers are stripped away by enough cold and fear and exhaustion. Father. Left. Rowan ducked. The blade passed above him. He came up, and the man who had swung it was on the ground, and Rowan was breathing hard with his back against the rock face, and the word was still in the air between them, hanging in the cold like visible breath. Father. Mira had already moved on, already 3 steps away dealing with the next problem, as though the word had escaped without her permission and she had not yet decided what to do about that. The remaining guards broke and ran. 8 had come into the Narrows. Fewer left. The ones who retreated would carry the message back to Vorn, that his evidence was gone, his guards had failed, and the mountain pass had not delivered what he had paid it to deliver. Rowan crossed the Narrows to where Thra had lowered herself against the rock face, one hand pressed flat against her side, breathing carefully. How bad, he said. Manageable, she said. That is not an answer. It is the answer I have, she said. Her eyes found Mira across the pass, and something in them was the most unguarded thing Rowan had ever seen on her face. Relief so complete it had no room left for composure. Mira came back to her, knelt in the snow without hesitation, and pressed both hands over Thra's wound with the focused practicality of someone whose love has always expressed itself through action rather than words. You are not allowed to die, Mira said. Quietly, fiercely. I have not given you permission. Noted, Thra said. And this time the shadow of a smile made it all the way to her eyes. Rowan stood over both of them in the snow and felt something in his chest that had been clenched for 15 years slowly, carefully, begin to open. Spring came to the borderlands the way it always did, quietly, without asking permission, pushing green through the frozen earth as though winter had simply been a long-held breath finally released. The eastern field, which Rowan had not been able to work since before Iron Hollow, broke open clean and dark under the plow. The soil was good. It had always been good. It had simply been waiting for enough hands. There were enough hands now. Lord Aldrich Vorn had been arrested before the first snowmelt. The documents from Blackrock Keep, carried down from Frost Pass wrapped in Rowan's oilcloth and delivered to the city council by a man who looked like a farmer because he was one, had moved through the chambers of power with the unstoppable momentum of truth that has been kept waiting too long. 7 villages. 15 years of falsified records. Payments to mercenaries and bribed officials laid out in Vorn's own careful hand. The council had no appetite for the scandal of protecting him and every appetite for the appearance of justice. He was tried in the early weeks of winter and executed before it ended. Rowan did not attend. He had said everything he needed to say in the documents. He felt no requirement to watch the conclusion. What he felt, standing in the courtyard the morning the news reached the farm, was not satisfaction. It was something quieter. The particular stillness of a debt paid that can never actually be settled. Ashvale could not be rebuilt by one man's death. Elend could not be returned. The 15 years could not be unlived. But the lie had been taken apart in public, piece by piece, and that was not nothing. Thra healed slowly. The wound from Frost Pass had been deep, and the winter was not kind to it. She spent the first weeks in the back room of the farmhouse, his wife's old sewing room, which he had not used for anything since Elin disappeared. Lying still with the focused determination of a woman who had decided to recover and was treating it as a task to be completed. Mira changed the dressings twice a day without being asked. She did it with the same practical tenderness she applied to everything. No ceremony, no sentiment on the surface, but her hands, always careful, always present. Rowan brought meals. He did not make conversation beyond what was needed, because he understood by now that Thera found silence more restoring than words, and that forcing warmth on a person who did not yet know how to receive it from a specific direction was its own kind of unkindness. He simply showed up. Every day, consistently. The way a farmer tends land, not with drama, but with the steady repetition that is its own form of devotion. Mira did not leave. This surprised him more than he admitted. He had expected her to return to Stonehaven, to the life she had built there, the work and the streets she knew. He had told her plainly in the early days of winter that she owed him nothing, that whatever she chose he would not call it abandonment, that she was her own person fully formed and complete without any addition from him. She had listened to all of this and then said, the rent on the workroom was 3 months behind anyway. He had almost smiled. Almost. She was not easy to live with. She had opinions about everything and expressed them without softening, and reorganized his kitchen in the first week in a way that made no sense until the 3rd week, when he realized it actually made considerably more sense than what he had been doing for 15 years. She argued with Thera the way people argue when they are genuinely comfortable, not to wound, but to think out loud, using the other person as a surface to sharpen against. She asked him questions about Elin. Not every day, but regularly. Carefully, choosing the moments when they were working side by side, and the rhythm of shared labor made conversation easier than silence. What did she sound like? What did she find funny? What was the farm like when she was alive? He answered everything. Some answers came easily. Some cost him considerably. She received all of them with the same serious attention, storing them in whatever place she was building inside herself. The architecture of a mother she had never known, constructed from second-hand descriptions and a silver bracelet and one dying woman's decision in a burning village to trust a stranger. One evening in late spring, all 3 of them sat on the low bench outside the farmhouse watching the light leave the eastern field. Thera's arm had healed enough that she no longer held it carefully. She was almost herself again. Almost being the word Rowan chose because he suspected the woman who had arrived at his farmhouse in chains and the woman sitting beside him now were related but not identical. Something had settled in her that had not been settled before. Nobody spoke for a long time. It was Mira who broke it, the way she broke most silences, directly, without preparation. I want to put a 3rd name on the shrine stone, she said. Rowan looked at her. Whose? She nodded toward Thera. Hers. She should be on it. She was there too. Thera said nothing. She looked at the field. But her jaw worked once, the way it did when she was keeping something in that wanted to come out. The stone already has 2 names, Rowan said carefully. Then we get a bigger stone, Mira said. As though it were simple. As though all the hardest things were, at the bottom of them, simple. Rowan looked at Thera. She was still looking at the field, but there was something on her face he had not seen there before. Not the shadow of a smile. An actual one. Small and private and entirely real. A bigger stone, Rowan said. Yes, Mira said. He nodded slowly. I know where to find one. The light finished leaving the field. The 3 of them sat in the comfortable dark and the farm settled around them. The creak of the old fence, the sound of the animals in the barn, the spring wind moving through the eastern trees. All the ordinary sounds of a life being lived. Not the life any of them had planned. Not the family any of them had expected. But real. Fully and completely real. And on the shrine at the edge of the south field, 2 carved names waited quietly for a 3rd. End of section 9. End of story.